There are nights when silence feels too heavy to ignore, the kind that makes you turn down the volume of your own breathing, as if even that might disturb whatever's hiding just beyond the edge of the dark. I used to tell myself those feelings were irrational, that the human mind just likes inventing shadows where none exist. But after what I've seen, I know better. Sometimes, silence is not empty. It's full of something waiting. That's why I'm telling these stories now, because lately, they've started coming back to me in pieces, smells, sounds, flashes of light behind my eyelids at night. I've tried to move on, to bury the memories somewhere deep, but they've begun surfacing again. Maybe talking about them is the only way to stop them from following me. I've always been fascinated by the kind of fear that doesn't scream, but lingers, the kind that builds in your chest like static before a storm. It starts with small things, the sound of a footstep when you know you're alone, a light flickering just once more than it should, or the sense that someone's eyes are on you from somewhere unseen. I used to brush those things off as coincidences, tricks of the mind, but the stories I'm about to share, they aren't tricks. They're real. They happen to people who never asked for any of it, and in each one, the fear started small, almost harmless, before unraveling into something much worse. The first story still gives me chills, even though it didn't happen to me directly. It began as a harmless night of exploration, a few friends sneaking into an abandoned middle school deep in North Jersey, chasing adrenaline and graffiti. They expected dust, silence, maybe the echo of their own footsteps. What they found instead was something painted in fresh red, still dripping, and the sound of voices that shouldn't have been there. That night, they learned that curiosity can lead you straight into the hands of something far darker than decay. The second story belongs to a man who thought moving out of the city would bring him peace. He wanted quiet, open space, and a life free from noise. He got that until one night, someone knocked on his door pretending to be a food delivery driver. He didn't realize until too late that the man outside wasn't holding any food, and that quiet country silence he'd craved so much became his worst enemy. And then there's the third story. It's one that still makes my skin crawl. A law student, smart, confident, in control, thought she was safe at a crowded bar surrounded by friends. But danger doesn't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes it's smiling right in front of you, sliding a drink across the table. What she uncovered that night could have ended very differently if she hadn't trusted her instincts. 3 people, 3 different nights, 3 moments when ordinary life cracked open to reveal something rotten beneath. What makes them so haunting isn't the gore or the violence, it's how familiar they are. Because any one of us could have been in their place. We all walk through quiet streets, open doors for strangers, sit across from someone who feels just a little too charming. And sometimes, all it takes is one small decision. One, it's probably nothing to step across that invisible line where the world stops feeling safe. These aren't ghost stories or urban legends. They're memories etched into real people, told with trembling voices and restless eyes. Maybe that's why they never leave me. Because deep down, I know the scariest things aren't the ones that hide in forests or abandoned houses. They're the ones that wait behind doors, on lonely roads, or in the faces of people who seem perfectly normal. If you've ever felt watched in your own home, or heard your name whispered when no one was there, then you already know the truth. Horror doesn't always announce itself. It slips in quietly, wearing a familiar face, until the moment you finally realize you're not alone. It started as just another night of boredom, the kind that always seemed to push us into doing something stupid. Back then, we thought exploring abandoned buildings was harmless, fun way to fill the hours when there was nothing better to do. Growing up in northern New Jersey, there were plenty of forgotten places tucked away on the outskirts of town, and every weekend we'd pick a new one to wander through. Crumbling warehouses, old factories, empty houses, they all blurred together after a while. But the abandoned middle school, that place felt different from the start. I still remember the drive out there. 4 of us packed into Yuri's car, laughing too loud, a bag of spray paint cans clinking at our feet, the windows down even though the night air was damp and heavy. We thought we were invincible. We thought the worst thing that could happen was getting caught by the cops. By the time we parked a few blocks away, it was already close to midnight. The building rose out of the dark like something dead that refused to stay buried. Massive, silent, all its windows boarded up. A chain-link fence circled the property, but someone had already cut a hole big enough for us to slip through. That was our first bit of luck, or what we thought was luck at the time. Inside the fence, the air felt colder. The grass was knee-high, the ground soft and uneven beneath our shoes. None of us said much as we crossed the yard. When we reached the side entrance, Frank gave the rusted handle a tug. To our surprise, it opened with a low groan. The smell hit us first. Old wood, mold, something else I couldn't place, like damp earth mixed with the faint scent of burnt plastic. We flicked on our flashlights and stepped inside. The beam cut through the dark, slicing across broken desks, peeling paint, and the remains of what had once been a hallway filled with life. I think that's what made it so unsettling. You could still imagine kids running through these halls years ago, before everything decayed. Now it was just quiet. Too quiet. We made jokes at first, pretending not to be creeped out. Frank tagged the wall with his name while Freddy filmed on his phone, whispering mock commentary like we were on some ghost hunting show. We moved from hallway to hallway, exploring classrooms stripped of anything valuable. The floors creaked under our weight, and every sound echoed forever. Somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard water dripping. Maybe a leak from the ceiling, I told myself. Maybe not. After about half an hour, we reached the basement. The steps were covered in debris, and the air grew thick the farther we went down. My flashlight caught on something, painted across the concrete floor. A large, uneven circle, jagged lines cutting through it. A pentagram. It looked old, faded, like whoever made it hadn't been there in years. Freddy whistled, muttering something about satanic rituals, but no one laughed. We didn't stay long. Even Yuri, who always acted like nothing could faze him, kept glancing back toward the stairs. We climbed up fast, our footsteps too loud, our breathing shallow. Back on the second floor, Frank spotted a blank wall that hadn't been tagged yet, and decided it was perfect for his next piece. He and I stayed behind to paint, while Yuri and Freddy said they'd scout ahead for the roof access. The sound of the spray cans filled the air, sharp bursts breaking the silence. When the paint ran out, Frank reached for his bag, only to realize it was gone. We both froze. He thought I was messing with him at first, but I hadn't moved from the corner of the room. We searched everywhere, behind the desks, under the windows, even the hallway outside. Nothing. The bag was just gone. A few minutes later, I wandered down the hall, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. My flashlight slid across a doorway on the right. The room beyond looked almost identical to the others, except for one thing, a red shape painted on the far wall. Another pentagram. But this one wasn't faded or dusty. The paint was still dripping. Thick streaks ran down the wall like blood, and in the corner, sitting neatly against the baseboard, was Frank's bag. I called his name, and when he came in, he just stood there staring. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Then Frank grabbed the bag, his voice shaking with anger as he muttered, "What the hell is wrong with him?" He meant Freddy, of course. That would have been exactly his kind of prank. Except this didn't feel like a prank. It felt wrong. We left the room fast and started down the hall, calling for the others. Before we could get far, we heard footsteps rapid, heavy, coming straight toward us. Then Yuri and Freddy appeared, eyes wide, yelling for us to run. No explanations, no time to think. We just ran. Down the stairs, through corridors that all looked the same. The sound of our shoes slapping against the tile, blending with the echo of other footsteps behind us. More than one pair. When we finally stopped to catch our breath, Yuri tried to explain between gasps. He said they'd gone down a floor looking for us when they heard something metal clinking, like tools or chains. They followed the noise into a classroom and found 3 figures kneeling in a circle, wearing dark cloaks, hunched over something on the floor. The second Freddy shined his flashlight. The figures turned their heads in perfect unison and scrambled to their feet. That's when the chase started. We could hear voices now, low and angry, echoing through the halls. Someone shouted something I'll never forget. "I should have cut you when I had the chance." The words bounced off the walls, closer than before. That was all it took. We bolted again, the fear pushing us faster than we thought we could move. Every turn looked familiar, yet wrong, like the building itself was shifting. When the exit finally came into view, the same door we'd entered through, it felt like seeing daylight after drowning. We tore through the hole in the fence and didn't stop running until we reached the car. None of us spoke during the drive back. Freddie stared out the window, silent, while Yuri kept checking the rearview mirror. Frank's hands were shaking so bad he dropped his lighter twice trying to smoke. I remember looking back at the school one last time as it faded behind us, the dark shape of it disappearing into the trees. It felt alive somehow, like it was watching us leave. Later, Freddie told us more. He said when the figures turned toward them, he could see their faces through the hoods. Not masks, just pale skin, eyes wide and unfocused, like they weren't really seeing anything. He swore one of them smiled. The cops never would have believed us, so we didn't report it. We just stopped going on those trips. To this day, that school is still standing. Sometimes I think about driving past it, just to see if it's really as big as I remember. But then I imagine that red paint still dripping down the wall, and I know I never will. When I first moved into that house, I thought I'd found peace. After years of city noise sirens, shouting, thin apartment walls, I was desperate for quiet. The place was nothing special. Just a small single-story home tucked behind a line of pine trees with a gravel driveway that crunched under the tires every time I came home. 2 bedrooms, a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, a kitchen that smelled faintly of old wood smoke. But it was mine. I told myself I could finally breathe out here. No more neighbors' TVs through the walls. No one knocking at 3 in the morning. No footsteps overhead. Just silence. The kind that seeps into your bones. For a while, that silence felt like a blessing. I'd come home from work, heat up leftover takeout, and fall asleep to the sound of wind brushing against the house. I didn't realize how quickly silence could turn into something else. Something that listens. It was late October, a Wednesday night if I remember right. I'd just gotten home around 9:45. Too tired to cook, too tired to do anything. I ordered Chinese food from a small place in town, the kind that still took orders by phone. It was quiet enough that I could hear the operator's pen scratching as she wrote it down. 20 minutes later, my doorbell rang. I remember thinking, that was fast. I hadn't even taken my boots off yet. I walked to the door and peered through the peephole. There was a man standing there, hoodie, jeans, hands in his pockets. No delivery bag, no receipt, no hat with the restaurant logo. Just a face I didn't recognize, and eyes that didn't blink. I should have trusted my gut right then, but I was exhausted and trying to be polite. I opened the door, just a crack, the chain still latched. "You here with the food?" I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. Said he wanted to double-check my order first before bringing it from his car. His tone was flat, rehearsed. Something about it made my stomach twist. I told him if he didn't have the food, there was no reason for him to be at my door, and I'd be calling the police. He didn't argue. He just muttered something I couldn't catch and walked back down the driveway. I watched him disappear into the dark, the shadows swallowing him whole. That's when I noticed there were no headlights anywhere. No car parked along the road. He hadn't come from anywhere. I shut the door, locked it, and immediately called the restaurant. The manager picked up, and when I explained what happened, he told me the delivery driver hadn't even left yet. My order was still on the counter. For a moment, I just stood there, the phone pressed against my ear, feeling cold all over. Whoever that man was, he'd been standing on my porch pretending to be a delivery guy, and he knew someone in this house was waiting for food. I called the non-emergency police line, filed a report, and they told me to stay alert. Nothing they could really do without a crime. It sounded reasonable at the time. I told myself it was over, that the guy had gotten scared off and moved on. When the real delivery driver showed up 20 minutes later, it must have looked like a ghost. He kept apologizing for being late, not realizing how close I'd come to opening my door all the way. Around 11:30, I was half asleep on the couch, the TV flickering in the dark, when I heard it. A soft scraping noise coming from the back of the house. At first I thought it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or branches against the siding, but then it came again. Scrape, pause, scrape, slow, deliberate, like metal against wood. I muted the TV and sat frozen, staring toward the kitchen where the back door was. Then, the doorknob jiggled. Just a small rattle at first, then harder, enough to make it click. Someone was testing it. I moved as quietly as I could, grabbed a kitchen knife, and stepped backward down the hallway to my bedroom. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unlock my phone to call 911. The operator told me to stay where I was and keep quiet. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as I crouched by the bed, listening. For the next 15 minutes, nothing moved except the wind. When the knock came at the front door, I nearly screamed. But then a voice called out, clear and firm, "Police." 2 officers searched the property while I waited on the porch, under the porch light that suddenly felt far too bright. They found no one, but near the back door, one of them crouched and pointed with his flashlight. There were fresh pry marks on the frame, thin grooves where someone had tried to wedge something beneath the lock. A screwdriver, maybe. He looked at me and said, "You did the right thing calling." That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind through the trees made me flinch. I left the lights on until morning. The next few days were quiet. No one came back. I convinced myself it had been random, that the man had moved on to easier targets. Then, 3 nights later, I woke up to sirens. At first I thought I was dreaming. Red and blue lights flashed faintly against the wall through the blinds, and I could hear cars speeding down the main road. It wasn't right outside, but close enough that it rattled the windows. I stood at the window watching until the sound faded, then went back to bed. Maybe an accident, I thought. Maybe nothing. 20 minutes later, someone knocked on my door again. 3 steady knocks. I froze. It was after 1 in the morning. For a full minute, I just stood there, staring at the door, listening. Then a voice said, "Police department, sir." I opened the door just enough to see 2 officers on the porch, uniforms unmistakable. One of them asked my name, then held up a phone. "Do you recognize this man?" he said. On the screen was a photo, grainy, lit by the flash of a patrol car. It was him, the man from my porch, the fake delivery driver. My stomach dropped. The officer told me they'd caught him trying to break into another house a few streets over. He'd resisted arrest, tried to run, but they got him. I remember asking if he'd said anything about my place, and the officer shook his head. "Not yet, but we'll make sure he doesn't bother anyone again." When they left, I locked every door and window twice over. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't. The thought that he'd been just a few blocks away, maybe watching, maybe waiting, made my skin crawl. The next day, I packed a bag and stayed at a motel for the weekend. I moved out of that house a month later. People ask why I never bought another place in the country, and I never know how to explain it. How do you tell someone that silence isn't peaceful anymore? That every time you hear it, you think of a man standing just outside your door, hands in his pockets, pretending to be someone safe? That's the worst part, the pretending. He looked so normal. He smiled. If I hadn't trusted my gut at the last second, I might not be here to tell the story. Sometimes at night, when I order food and hear the knock at my apartment door, I hesitate. I still check for the bag, for the uniform, for anything that proves the person outside is who they say they are. Because once you've heard the sound of someone trying to force their way into your home, that sound never really leaves you. It echoes, even when you know you're safe. Especially then. It was supposed to be a normal Saturday night, the kind that starts with cheap drinks and ends with bad decisions you laugh about the next morning. Catherine had been home from law school for a few weeks, trying to unwind from a brutal semester that had stripped her of sleep and sanity. Back in her hometown, everything felt lighter, familiar streets. The same circle of friends, bars that still played old songs everyone knew the words to. That night, she and her best friend Jackie headed to their usual spot, a crowded place 2 towns over that smelled of spilled rum and perfume. It wasn't glamorous, but it was alive. The kind of place that made you forget how tired you were. Catherine wasn't the kind of girl who sought danger. She was cautious, thoughtful, maybe even too aware of her surroundings. But that night, as she stood at the bar waiting for her drink, she felt the smallest nudge against her shoulder and turned to see a tall guy with a half smile and the kind of confidence that usually came from being told yes too many times. His name was Sebastian. His friend's name was Luke. They introduced themselves with easy grins and the casual charm that didn't feel forced, at least not yet. Jackie hit it off with Luke right away. Catherine, out of politeness, kept up conversation with Sebastian. He was funny in that calculated way, every joke carefully timed, every compliment subtle but practiced. She played along. That was her little game, pretending to be a bit more naive than she was, watching how men's expressions changed when they thought they were smarter. It wasn't cruel, just a quiet rebellion. When Sebastian offered to buy another round, Catherine agreed. Rum and coke, nothing fancy. They clinked glasses and kept talking until Jackie leaned in and whispered that she needed to use the bathroom. Catherine followed her, weaving through the crowd and the pulsing bass of the music. Inside the bathroom, Jackie was grinning like a teenager. "I think I'm going home with him," she said, fixing her lipstick. Catherine blinked, caught off guard. Jackie wasn't usually impulsive. "Are you serious?" she asked. Jackie laughed, shrugging. "Why not? He's cute. It's just one night." Catherine didn't argue. She'd learned long ago that reasoning with her friend when she was in that mood was pointless. Still, something in her chest tightened. Not jealousy, not judgment, just unease. When they came back out, the energy at the bar had shifted. Sebastian and Luke were standing by their table, but they weren't laughing or talking like before. They were quiet, leaning toward each other, whispering. Catherine slowed her steps, watching them. Their posture was different, stiff. The moment the girls got close enough, both men straightened and smiled again like nothing had happened. On the table were 4 drinks, 2 rum and cokes, and 2 strange yellow ones topped with melting slush. They looked too bright, too deliberate. Catherine tilted her head, smiling lightly. "What are those?" she asked. Sebastian grinned. "Piña coladas. We figured we'd mix it up." His tone was casual, but his eyes didn't quite match. She laughed softly, pretending not to notice. "Those seem a little girly for you," she teased. Then, before either man could react, she slid the rum and cokes across the table toward them and took one of the yellow drinks for herself. "Wouldn't want anyone judging you," she added with a wink before taking a slow sip. Jackie followed her lead, smiling awkwardly but trusting her friend's unspoken cue. For a few seconds, no one said anything. Sebastian's expression froze, a flicker of something dark passing through his eyes before he smirked. "Touché," he said finally, lifting the rum and coke in mock salute. Luke followed suit. They all drank. The tension broke. Catherine exhaled, pretending to relax, but inside her mind was racing. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe she was overreacting. Still, that tiny look on Sebastian's face wouldn't leave her. An hour later, Luke suggested they go back to his apartment. "Just for a nightcap," he said. Jackie was already nodding. Catherine didn't want to go, but she couldn't exactly let her best friend head off with 2 men she barely knew. So she smiled, said sure, and followed them outside into the humid summer night. The Uber ride was quiet. The driver made small talk, no one answered. Catherine stared out the window, watching the city lights blur into suburbs, then into narrow residential streets lined with flickering lamps. Luke's apartment was small, 2nd floor, with barely any furniture, the kind of place that looked temporary. Inside, he offered them White Claws from the fridge and put on music through his TV. Everything about it felt rehearsed, like a scene playing out exactly how they'd planned it. At first, everything was fine. They laughed, drank, joked about bad dates, but soon things started to shift. The guys' laughter got louder, sloppier. Their words began to slur. Luke leaned back on the couch, eyes glassy. Sebastian's grin twisted into something unfocused. Catherine's stomach turned. They hadn't had that much to drink. She looked at Jackie, who was swaying slightly, confusion in her eyes. Within minutes, both men were nearly unconscious. Sebastian's head drooping, Luke sliding sideways until his drink spilled across the rug. Catherine's chest went cold. Her suspicion from earlier solidified into certainty. She grabbed Jackie's wrist. "We're leaving," she whispered. Jackie blinked, groggy. "Why? What's wrong?" "They're out cold," Catherine said. "They were supposed to be us." It took a second for the words to register. Then Jackie's face changed. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God." They stood frozen, the only sounds in the room, the soft hum of the fridge and the muffled bass of music still playing. Catherine's eyes darted around, scanning the space. There was almost nothing, no photos, no personal items, not even mail on the counter. It didn't look lived in. It looked staged. Jackie wanted to search for proof, something to show the police, but Catherine shook her head. "We need to go now," she said. "We don't know if someone else is coming." She half-dragged her friend to the door. As they stepped into the hallway, Catherine glanced back one last time. Sebastian's eyes were open now, unfocused but staring in their direction. She didn't wait to see if he was awake. She shut the door and ran. They didn't go to the police. How could they? There was no evidence, no video, no drugs to test. Just a gut feeling and two men who had probably done this before. They spent the night at Jackie's house, sitting in silence until the sun came up. Every time a car passed outside, they both flinched. The next day, Catherine deleted her dating apps, stopped going to bars, and tried to convince herself it was over, but it never really left her. Sometimes, she still dreams about that night. The drinks, the slow smiles, the yellow slush melting over ice. In the dream, she's back at the table, only this time she doesn't switch the glasses. She takes the rum and coke, drinks it, and everything fades to black. She always wakes up right after that, breathless, the taste of sugar still on her tongue. She knows they'll never know what would have happened if she hadn't trusted her instincts. But the thought that those men are still out there somewhere, maybe trying again with someone else, keeps her up some nights. She tells herself it's not her fault for not reporting them, that without proof, no one would have believed her. Still, every time she sees a stranger smile at her across a bar, she feels that same chill crawl up her spine. Evil doesn't always look evil. Sometimes it looks like two guys with easy smiles and expensive cologne. Sometimes it sounds like laughter and flattery. And sometimes it waits for you to let your guard down just long enough to hand you the wrong drink. Sometimes when I finish telling these stories, people ask me if I still believe in monsters. I tell them no, not the kind with claws or glowing eyes. The ones that haunt me now wear normal faces. They hold doors open, they smile, they ask questions that sound kind. You pass them in grocery aisles, share elevators with them, maybe even say good morning. They blend in so easily that you never notice until it's too late. That's what makes these stories stay with me. The realization that true horror doesn't live in the supernatural. It lives in the ordinary. The abandoned school in Jersey wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by people who used the dark as a mask, who knew that curiosity would eventually bring someone to them. The man at the royal doorstep wasn't a phantom. He was patient, practiced, the kind of predator who waits for silence to become an accomplice. And those two men in the bar, they didn't need shadows to hide behind. They smiled right through the neon light, knowing no one would suspect a thing. Each story reminds me of the same truth, that evil isn't loud. It's quiet. It whispers instead of screams. It asks, "Can I come in?" We like to think we'd recognize danger when it stares us in the face, that our instincts would kick in and save us. But fear doesn't always announce itself. It slips in sideways, disguised as politeness, curiosity, or trust. The kids in that school thought they were chasing adventure. The man in that house thought he was chasing peace. The girl at that bar thought she was chasing a night of fun. Each of them reached out for something harmless and touched something that stared back. That's the cruelty of reality. It doesn't warn you when the story you're in is turning into a nightmare. You only realize it when you're already running, or when the door handle starts to turn, or when the drink in your hand suddenly tastes too sweet. What still chills me is how easily it could happen again. That abandoned school is probably still standing somewhere, surrounded by weeds, waiting for new explorers who think danger is just part of the thrill. Somewhere else, another house sits far from the city, another quiet road where a car might stop with its headlights off. And in another crowded bar, under dim red lights, someone might already be watching the next person laugh, already stirring something into a glass. Horror doesn't end when the story does. It just changes its disguise. Sometimes I wonder if we're meant to remember these things for a reason. Maybe stories like these exist to keep us awake. Maybe fear, in small doses, is a kind of survival mechanism, a warning pulse that says, be careful who you trust. The people in these stories survived because something inside them whispered that warning just in time. A split-second decision, a gut feeling, a sense that something wasn't right. That's what saved them. And maybe that's what saves any of us. If you've ever walked home alone and felt the urge to look over your shoulder, or hesitated before unlocking your door, or watched a stranger smile linger a little too long, listen to that feeling. It's not paranoia. It's the part of you that remembers what danger really looks like. It doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it just waits for you to let your guard down. I've told these stories not to scare you, but to remind you that fear has a purpose. It keeps you sharp. It keeps you alive. The people in these stories didn't set out to find horror, but horror found them anyway in places as ordinary as a school, a home, a bar. That's the real reason I can't forget them. Because deep down, I know it could have been any of us. So if you ever hear a sound where there shouldn't be one, or see a light flicker when everything's still, don't dismiss it. Don't tell yourself it's nothing. Because sometimes, the smallest detail, the drip of paint still wet, the knock that comes too late, the smile that feels off by a fraction is the only warning you'll ever get. And if you're lucky enough to walk away, remember that feeling. Remember what it taught you. Because out there, somewhere, someone else hasn't yet learned to listen.